Hi, my name is Brooke Mills and I'm with Cookies by Brooke, and I am going to walk you through decorating some simple Christmas cookies today. So in your box, you should have 6 Christmas cookies. You should also have 4 piping bags with icing in them, a small container of sanding sugar, a toothpick, and a coffee filter, which we're going to use when we use the sanding sugar to collect it so that it doesn't go everywhere. If you would prefer to use a paper plate over the coffee filter, that also works very well, as long as it's something that can bend easily and pour back into your little sanding sugar container. I would not recommend using a styrofoam plate because the static from that can really be a pain to work with, but a paper plate works well, or you can just use the coffee filter. 2 other things that you're going to need to have on hand: a pair of scissors to get started, and a damp washcloth. This is just to clean off your piping bags as you go, clean up any little spills, messes. It doesn't need to be soaking wet, just damp, it's fine. And with your scissors, you're going to start by cutting a little hole in your piping bags. And if you want to turn it until you find the seam, put the seam on top, gently flatten the tip of your bag, and you're just going to cut a small end off. Keep in mind, this can always be made larger, but it cannot be made smaller. And set that to the side and repeat. You're going to want to do, I've already cut my black this morning, but you're going to want to cut the black really small because you're going to do some detailing work with that. The other 3 you can cut a little bit larger. Like I said, always keep in mind you can go back and make that cut larger if you need to, but you can't make it smaller. Once you have the ends cut off of your piping bags, you are all ready to go. So we're going to start with our Santa cookie, which is this one. I had him upside down. I'm going to find that point on your Santa cookie. That point is his beard. So this is the right way for him to go, with that point at the bottom. And we're going to start with our white, and we're going to put the sanding sugar portion of his hat on. So that means this little circle here. And anytime that you're using the sanding sugar, just set that cookie there in the coffee filter, and then you can just dump the sanding sugar on top, shake off the excess, and then you can take the extra sanding sugar and just pour it right back into your cup. So you want to start with the end of his hat, and then you're going to come and do the brim. And you'll notice that when I'm piping with my icing, I keep my bag up in the air. That actually gives you better control, to not be dragging it along your cookie, but to have it slightly up in the air. So just put a wide brim on your hat. Doesn't need to be perfect because the sanding sugar is going to hide details that aren't perfect on this. Again, place it back in your coffee filter, and then use your sanding sugar to cover that up. And then gently brush that off. Okay? And we're going to add a face for him, and we're going to just dip down here. That's going to be his mouth. So this is roughly the outline you're looking for with that lower spot in there. That's going to be his lower lip kind of peeping out through his beard and his mustache. And then fill it in. If you're having a hard time getting your icing to go smooth, in all likelihood, it means that you need more of it. Beginners tend to not put enough icing on. You can also use your toothpick that came in your kit. Smooth your icing out, but don't do that for very long. If you do it for very long, the icing will start to dry and you will start to leave lines in it. I'm going to come back with your white and fill in the bottom part of this cookie, which is going to be his beard. Your piping will not be this smooth. Nobody's is at the beginning, and that's okay, because you're not going to see those lines if you fill it in immediately and use your toothpick to smooth it out. Don't be afraid of the icing. Use plenty of it. And then smooth with your toothpick. Okay, we're going to turn Santa around here and just get the top of his hat. We're doing all of the base of our Santa because we need him to set up a little bit so that we can come back and put a nose and a mustache and eyes on him. But we need this base layer to set up a bit before we can do all of that. So once you are to this stage and you have your beard, your face, your hat, go ahead and set him to the side. We're gonna let him dry a bit while we work on other cookies. Next, you're going to take your Mrs. Claus. She has a bun in her hair, so that's up at the top. We're going to start with our skin tone. Actually, check that. I'm going to start with her bow. Her bow in her hair. I'm going to start by making 2 rounded triangles. And you can see the lines up here on the edge of the cookie where that bow is gonna go. And then just fill that in. Okay. Now, we'll take her face. I'm gonna have her hair coming down next to her ears here. Just a little bit. So bring it down, and then we're gonna sweep it over across her forehead and up to the part in her hair. And then come down and do the same little pointed part here by her other ear. And then you're gonna continue around her chin and her ear. And then immediately go in and fill in her face with this flesh tone icing. Just like that. Then come back with your toothpick again. Fill in any spaces. I'm going to move pretty quickly with this because this icing will start to set up. soon, and then it will leave marks and lines where you didn't get the icing. If you have a bubble, turn your toothpick sideways, lay it across the bubble, pop it up really fast. It will break the surface tension and break the bubble. Okay. Now you're gonna wanna fill in the rest of that cookie with your white for her hair. Again, just like with our Santa cookie, we are laying a base down so that it can have time to set up. And then that will give us time to come back and put in some details for her. So just take it kind of one section at a time here. Fill it in. There we go. Okay. Now, if you feel like it's not very smooth, you can take your cookie and just gently shake it. It will smooth out. Well, you can always add a little bit more icing if you have a few places that are not quite smooth for you. I see another air bubble, so I'm gonna pop that really fast. There we go. She's gonna set to the side for a few minutes to dry as well. Next, we'll take our snowman. He's gonna get some earmuffs. There's no upside or downside on this snowman because he is exactly the same either way. So just put on some nice red earmuffs for him, and then we will put some sugar on that to make them look fuzzy. Again, when you're piping lines, helps to pick that bag up in the air. Don't drag it. But believe it or not, you get better control that way. So once you have his earmuffs in place, set him on your coffee filter or your paper plate and just cover him in sanding sugar. That gives it a nice kind of fuzzy look to it, those earmuffs. I like to get the extra sugar off of there so it's not leaving bumps in my icing. And then you're just gonna go ahead and fill in the rest of his head with the white icing. Especially when you're doing larger spaces like this, don't be afraid to use enough icing. Again, beginners tend to not use enough, and that's why it won't go smooth for them. And it can be a little bit tough getting your icing up against that sanding sugar. Normally, I will say this, normally if you were doing a cookie set, sanding sugar would actually be your last step and not your first. You would do all the other parts of your cookie, you would let it completely dry, like overnight, and then you would add your sanding sugar. But we don't have the luxury of that much time, so it kind of helps to push that icing up against the sanding sugar. It just doesn't want to stick to the sanding sugar, so it can be a little tough to get it up in those corners. And set your snowman to the side. Next, we're going to bring in our mitten. He's going to get a cuff at the bottom. We're going to use the sanding sugar again on that. And then you're going to fill that mitten with red. You'll see that I really keep my tip of my bag well up in the air when I'm doing this. And then you're gonna have to squeeze to get this icing out. If yours is not coming out at all, you might have to cut that hole a little bigger. I will say this, if your bag has sat for a few minutes and it's not coming out, it's probably because the icing at the very end has hardened up. You might have to just gently squeeze the bag, pinch it with your fingers like that, and get the very end of the icing out, and then that will get it going again. So try that before cutting a bigger hole, but if your icing's not moving fast enough, cut a little larger hole if you need to. But you need to cover this cookie pretty quickly because that icing will start to dry. When you're working in a large space like this, you've got to move pretty fast. So get plenty of icing on there. Don't be afraid of it. And I know mine looks pretty goofy. That's okay. If you have enough of it, it's gonna smooth out very, very easily. But this is a place where you do need to move pretty quickly and you need to use plenty of icing. I'm gonna pick this up a little bit so it's easier for me to manipulate it with one hand under the cookie and one hand on the cookie. So I'm just gonna move that icing around. Now, I don't wanna mess with it for very long because the longer I go, the more dry this is. A few bubbles that I'm gonna pop, and then I'm gonna leave this alone. If it's not perfectly smooth, don't stress about it. We're gonna add some detail to this that will make that less noticeable. Just get him flooded and then set it to the side so it could dry. And then we're gonna do similar with our hat. We're gonna add a cuff again with the sanding sugar. And this time we're gonna also do the top of the hat, the little pom-pom on the top. And then I'm gonna show you how to do kind of a knit pattern in icing on the rest of the hat. And you can see I did not use enough. This is what happens when you don't use enough icing. It just doesn't smooth out. If yours is looking like that, just add more icing. There we go. Much better. And then we'll do his little pom-pom on the top here. This has a couple of air bubbles. It doesn't matter as much when you have the sanding sugar going on top of it, if you have air bubbles or not. But that is a nice way to pop an air bubble, is just to lay your toothpick flat and break the surface tension of your icing. It works really well. Then you take your coffee filter, put that on there. And then you're gonna hit both the top and the bottom with that sanding sugar. Shake off the excess. Brush any that's left on the cookie. And pour the rest back. Okay, now we're gonna fill this in with the red like we did with the mitten. And again, you need to move fairly quickly. We don't want our red to set up because we're going to do what's called a wet on wet design with it. Wet on wet means that you are putting the design down while your base is still dry, or still wet, excuse me. You're not letting it set. That means that anything you put on top of it while it's still wet is going to sink down into that icing and you're gonna have a flat surface when it's all dry, rather than having a raised design on it. So again, plenty of icing. Don't worry if it's a little bit messy. Mine is on the side here today. Push it towards that sugar a little bit so you don't have a gap. And then quickly smooth it out. Now, on the hat, before that base can dry at all, we're going to come in with our white. And we're going to put some curved lines in here, starting up here. Okay. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our toothpick, we're gonna pull down, pull down, pull down. Okay, clean your toothpick off. And then you're going to pull up in the middle of those two, up here, and up here. And curve all of that up towards the pom-pom at the top. And it gives it kind of a knit cap look to it. And that is the hat. The hat is done. That's all we're gonna do on it. So there's the hat. Finally, we're going to take our candy cane. It's our last cookie before we go back and add details. And our candy cane is going to have a wet on wet design too. So we're going to want to move fairly quickly again to fill it in. Don't be afraid of that icing. Just keep getting it on there. And then once you have enough icing in place, smooth it out. I like to pick mine up because I get a little bit better control that way. Smooth your icing out. A bubble there and a bubble there. And another bubble or two. So pop those. Smooth it out one more time. And then while this is wet, I'm gonna go ahead and add my stripes with my red. And you can see down here what happens when you get a little bit too much. I actually put a little too much on there. I'm gonna take my toothpick straight up and down, and I'm just gonna run it along that edge and pull off the icing where I went a little bit overboard. And then I'll clean off that toothpick. That's a good way to clean up your edges if you just got a little too much there. Works very well. Goodness, he wants to go everywhere. Okay, so clean up my edges. And then I'm gonna take my red, and my red needs that end cleaned because it's coming out funny, so just clean that off. And then I'm gonna make stripes. Okay, and then I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna look for any spots that I didn't fully get my stripes the way I wanted it. Okay, and you can see that is already starting to go flat. That is the nice thing about the wet on wet design, is that it will just settle down so that your design is completely flat. You can see that I am still cleaning up some edges. I just run that toothpick straight up and down. Take off any excess icing. There is the candy cane. It is also finished. So I'm going to set it over here with my hat. And then we're going to start going back and adding some details in. First, we're going to come here with our Santa. We're going to put on his nose, right about in the middle of his face. And then this is where you should have your black. His eyes. And I like to take my toothpick and just get a little bit of white icing and put a dot in his eyes for a little sparkle. And then I'm also going to take that white and I'm going to give him some eyebrows. And then we're going to let that nose set up a little bit. We'll come back and give him a mustache in a few minutes, but he needs to sit just a bit. Okay. This is something that you might want to practice on a piece of paper before attempting it. And it might be too much. I don't know. But we're going to try to do a pair of glasses on Mrs. Claus here. And if this is intimidating to you, you can just give her eyes like Santa. That's fine. But start with your black, cleaned off really well. And if you would like to give her some glasses, you just do 2 circles on either side of her nose. Like that. A little bridge in the middle. And then for her eyes, I'm just going to have them be closed with some eyelashes. Yeah. Don't feel like you need to do that. That's a lot. You can just give her eyes like Santa if you need to. Then I'm gonna take my red and I'm gonna put a little dot here and then pull it down, and then a little dot next to it and pull it down, and just give her a little heart-shaped mouth. And then I'm also gonna give her some earrings. Okay, now we're gonna come in, we're gonna put some details up here on her. And we take and put an oval line on the top of each one of those bows, like that, to define it. And then just a dot in the middle of our bow. That's how we define her bow. And then we're gonna take our white and kind of outline her hair here. Let's start by putting a little swirl up here for her bun. And then I'm gonna follow her hairline. And again, whenever I'm doing any kind of piping, I'm gonna keep that bag up in the air. I'm not gonna drag it. So I outline her hair, and then I like to go and just put some lines in there. This is all optional. You can do this any way you want or not at all. But I like the definition that it gives her. And now Mrs. Claus is done. I'm gonna set her to the side and get our Frosty here. I like to start with his nose right in the middle because it kind of gives me an anchor of where I need to go. He's gonna get eyes like Santa. Couple of eyebrows. I'm gonna come back and put that sparkle in his eye with the white, just like I did with Santa. And then I like to give him kind of a wobbly smile. There he is. He's a happy little guy. All right, he is done. Last step, you can do any kind of a design you want on your mitten. I'm going to put a small snowflake on it. If you're not daring enough to do this, that is just fine. What you need is 6 lines, a dot in the middle, a dot on each end, like that. And then I just put a narrow V on each branch to make it like a snowflake. Like that. Okay, we are almost done, but Santa still needs a mustache. There's one side. And then I'm going to kind of bring these in a little bit closer so that they are touching just in the middle. And there he is. Okay, so we have Santa, Mrs. Claus, our snowman, our mitten, our hat, candy cane. We are done. Thank you for joining us today. I hope yours goes as well.